The heat pressed down on the colony like a heavy blanket, the air dry and tinged with dust. Jace wiped the sweat from his brow as he made his way down the crowded main street. He wasn't supposed to be here, at least not for this. A coworker had told him there was an urgent meeting at the old depot. Jace, tired from a long week in the mines, had trudged over without thinking twice. But instead of a meeting, he found himself being pushed toward the back lot, where a makeshift stage had been set up. "What is this?" he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. His so-called friend only grinned and gave him another shove. On the stage, a broad-shouldered auctioneer with a booming voice was shouting to the gathered crowd. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, our special tradition. The lucky man of the day will claim himself a bride for the modest price of 5 credits. Yes, that's right, less than the cost of a drink." The crowd roared with laughter. Jace's stomach turned as the auctioneer waved for him to step up. "Looks like our lucky man is here," the auctioneer declared, gripping Jace by the shoulder. "Let's bring out the bride." From the shadows at the side of the stage, 2 guards dragged a figure into the light. She was small, thin, her clothes ragged and stained with dust. Her wrists were chained, and her hair hung in tangled strands across her face. But when she looked up, Jace froze. Her eyes, bright, sharp, and full of defiance, met his without flinching. "She's a rare one," the auctioneer said, circling her like a prize animal. "A captured dressari, straight from the border worlds. Strong stock, good for work, and—" "That's enough," Jace said sharply. The crowd laughed again, taking his tone as part of the act. "Oh, come on, Jace," someone called from the back. "It's tradition. 5 credits and she's yours." Jace's first instinct was to walk away. This was barbaric. But as he looked at the girl, no, the woman, standing there with the weight of every eye in the crowd on her, he realized what would happen if he left. Someone else would buy her. Someone worse. 5 credits, the auctioneer prompted, grinning. Jace reached into his pocket, pulled out the small handful of coins he had, and dropped them into the auctioneer's palm. The laughter around him shifted into murmurs. A few people looked confused. Others looked disappointed. The auctioneer's grin faltered slightly before he recovered. "Sold. To the brave miner with more heart than sense." The guards shoved the woman toward him. She stumbled but caught herself, keeping her head high. Jace took the key from the guard's hand and unlocked her chains without a word. "Let's go," he said quietly. She didn't move at first, as if unsure whether this was another trick. But when he turned and stepped off the stage, she followed, her bare feet silent on the dusty ground. They walked through the market in silence. Jace could feel the eyes of the crowd on them, some curious, some mocking. He kept his pace steady until they reached the quieter back streets. At his small home near the edge of the colony, he opened the door and stepped aside. "You can stay here tonight. There's food and water inside. I'll leave you be." She hesitated on the threshold, scanning the interior as if looking for hidden traps. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "You don't owe me anything. Eat, rest. That's all." Finally, she stepped inside. Jace closed the door gently behind her and set a plate of bread and fruit on the table. Without another word, he walked to the spare room, leaving her alone. He lay awake for a long time that night, staring at the ceiling. He'd bought her for 5 credits, but he had no intention of keeping her as property. The question was, what would happen to her now? The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the cooling unit in the corner. The woman stood just inside the doorway, her bare feet on the worn wooden floor, eyes scanning every corner of the small house. Jace watched from the kitchen doorway for a moment before speaking. "Water's on the table. Food's there too. Take what you want." She didn't answer. Her gaze lingered on him for a fraction of a second before flicking away, like a stray animal making sure the stranger with the open hand wasn't hiding a trap. Jace walked past her to the sink, filling his own cup with water. He drank slowly, letting her see he wasn't in any hurry to close the distance between them. Then he set the cup down and headed toward his room. "You'll have the spare," he said, pointing to the small door at the far end of the hall. "It's not much, but the bed's clean." Her brow furrowed slightly. She hadn't moved toward the food. Jace paused. "Do you understand me?" She nodded once, slow, deliberate. "All right," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Then good night." When he closed his bedroom door, he didn't sleep. He lay on his back, listening. A faint creak came from the hallway, followed by soft steps on the floor. She was moving toward the table. Jace stayed where he was, letting her have privacy. The sound of the water jug pouring was followed by quiet chewing. She was eating, but slowly, as though expecting someone to take it away. He wondered how long it had been since she'd had a proper meal without a chain on her wrists. Hours passed before the house finally fell silent again. The next morning, Jace woke to find the table spotless. The plate and cup were washed and placed neatly on the counter. The blanket from the spare bed was folded at the foot, though the pillow still bore the faint impression of her head. She was sitting by the window, looking out toward the dusty street. "Morning," he said. She didn't reply, but her eyes tracked him as he moved through the room. Jace poured himself some coffee, then leaned against the counter. "I'm heading to the mines in an hour. You can stay here while I'm gone if you want." Her head turned slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. "It's safer than wandering out there," he added. For a long moment, she just sat there, staring at him like she was trying to read something hidden in his voice. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, accented. "Why?" Jace set the cup down. "Why what? Why keep me here?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "Others, they would." She stopped, her lips pressing together. "I'm not others," Jace said simply. "You're free to leave whenever you want. But if you're hungry or tired, you're welcome to stay." She studied him for several seconds, as if waiting for the part where he laughed and took it back. When he didn't, she looked away again. Later, when Jace came back from the mines, the house was quiet. He half expected her to be gone. Instead, he found her in the small backyard, crouched beside the water pump. She was cleaning her hair with slow, careful motions, her cloak draped over the fence to dry. Without the dust and grime, he could see more of her face. Sharp cheekbones, a faint pattern on her skin that caught the sunlight. She noticed him watching and froze, her posture tensing. "I'm not here to stop you," he said, raising his hands slightly. "Just checking you're all right." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Do you have a name?" he asked. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Sirin." He nodded. "All right, Sirin. I'm Jace." Her gaze flicked to him, then back to the pump. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. That night, she ate the stew he made, though she kept her distance at the table. Jace didn't push conversation. When she finished, she set the bowl down gently and said, almost reluctantly, "Thank you." It was the first time she'd spoken without suspicion. Jace gave her a small smile. "You're welcome." He didn't know it yet, but that one word was the first crack in the wall Sirin had built around herself. The days settled into a quiet rhythm. Jace left early for the mines, returned in the late afternoon, and found Sirin either in the small yard or sitting by the window. She never wandered far from the house, but he noticed she was slowly shedding the look of someone ready to run at a moment's notice. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Instead, he focused on the small things, making sure there was fresh bread on the table in the morning, leaving a cup of clean water on the counter before he left, and keeping the spare room warm at night. One evening, when he came home, he found her in the kitchen. She was washing the few dishes they had, her movements slow and deliberate. He set his work gloves on the table and said, "You don't have to do that." She glanced over her shoulder. "I know." It was such a simple answer, but it told him more than anything else had. Later that week, a dust storm rolled in from the hills. The wind howled against the house, rattling the shutters. Jace lit the small oil lamp on the table, casting warm light across the room. Sirin was sitting near the corner, her knees pulled up under a blanket. Her hair, now clean and brushed, caught the light, and the faint patterns on her skin seemed to shimmer when she moved. Jace noticed she kept touching something hidden in her palm. "What's that?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then opened her hand. Resting there was a small, broken pendant, just a fragment of what had once been a circular piece, its edges worn smooth. "It belonged to my mother," she said softly. "It was taken from me when I was sold. I found it again in a trader's stall." Jace leaned forward. "It's cracked. I can fix it." Her eyes lifted sharply. "Why?" "Because it matters to you," he said simply. She studied him for a long moment before handing it over. It took him 2 nights to repair the pendant with the small tools he kept in his workshop. When he gave it back, the silver join was visible but strong. Siren ran her fingers over it slowly, as if testing its weight. "You did this yourself?" "Yeah," Jay said. "Not perfect, but it should hold." For the first time, she gave him a real smile, small but genuine. "Thank you, Jace." One evening, as the last of the storm clouds faded and the sky burned orange, Siren spoke more than she ever had before. "My home was a place of green valleys and deep rivers," she began, her voice low and even. "My people lived in small villages close to the land. We had no soldiers, no weapons worth speaking of. We thought we were safe." She paused, her eyes on the horizon. "The raiders came in the night. They took everything: food, tools, people. I was separated from my family before dawn. We were sold in markets from one system to the next until I stopped counting." Jace's jaw tightened. "And no one tried to stop them?" "Some did," she said. "They died." Silence settled between them. Jace didn't push for more. He knew she was giving him what she could, and that was enough for now. The next day, Siren surprised him. When he returned from the mines, she had cooked a simple meal. Bread warmed in the oven, stew simmering on the stove. "I thought you might be tired," she said when he stepped in. Jace smiled. "I am. This is more than I expected." They ate together, the space between them at the table smaller than it had been before. Siren still watched him carefully, but her eyes no longer carried the same sharp suspicion. That night, as Jace was closing up the shutters, Siren stood in the doorway of her room. "You could have left me there," she said. He looked at her. "I wasn't going to. You didn't know me. I could have been—" She stopped herself, shaking her head. "I didn't need to know you," Jace said. "I just knew you didn't belong there." Siren's eyes softened, and she nodded once before stepping back into her room. Jace stood there for a moment, realizing that the walls between them were thinner now. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew one thing. Siren wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live again. The next week brought warmer weather, but it also brought more people into the streets. The mining season was in full swing, and traders, prospectors, and drifters filled the market square each day. Jace had to pick up new tools from the blacksmith, and Siren offered to walk with him. It was the first time she'd gone into town without her cloak pulled tightly around her. Her hair was braided neatly, the repaired pendant resting just below her collarbone. At first, no one paid her much attention, but as they moved through the square, conversations quieted. A few heads turned. Whispers started to follow them. "Is that her?" someone muttered. "Thought she was gone," another said. Jace kept his pace steady, but he noticed Siren's hands had tightened around the small basket she carried. They had just passed the well when a group of miners stepped into their path. 3 men, all broad-shouldered, with the easy arrogance of those used to getting their way. The tallest of them smirked. "Well, if it isn't Cole," he said, looking Jace up and down. His gaze slid to Siren. "And this must be the famous 5-credit bride." Jace's jaw tightened. "Step aside." The man chuckled. "Relax, I just wanted a look. Folks are saying you keep her like some kind of pet. How much for an hour?" Siren's knuckles whitened around the basket handle. "Watch your mouth," Jace said, his voice low. One of the other miners grinned. "Or what? You'll fight over a slave?" "She's not a slave," Jace said. "Not to me, not to anyone." The tall miner took a step closer, the smirk fading from his face. "Careful, Cole. You talk like that too loud." and the governor's office might start asking questions. I'm not afraid of questions, Jace replied. The man leaned in slightly. You should be. For a moment, neither moved. The air between them was taut as a drawn wire. Then Jace shifted his weight, just enough to make it clear he was ready to end the conversation with his fists if needed. The tall miner looked at him for a long moment, then spat on the ground. Not worth it. He motioned to his friends, and they moved aside. Jace and Siren walked on without looking back. They didn't speak until they were halfway home. Siren's voice was quiet, but steady. That's not the first time someone's spoken like that to you, is it? No, Jace said. But it's the first time they've done it in front of you. You could have ignored them, she said. I don't ignore people who disrespect someone under my roof, Jace replied. Her steps slowed slightly. I've never had anyone do that for me. He glanced at her. You do now. That evening, Jace was repairing a bent shovel handle in the yard when Siren came outside. She stood for a moment, watching him work, then said, I've been thinking about leaving. The words made his hands still. Leaving? Why? You've already had trouble because of me. It will get worse, she said. I don't want to be the reason you lose your place here. He set the shovel aside and stood. Siren, listen to me. If you leave, they'll find you. And it won't be to give you a home. It'll be to sell you again. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't look away. And if I stay? Then we deal with it together. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. The next morning, Jace found a small bundle of fresh bread on the table. Siren was sitting by the window, her hands folded in her lap. I made extra, she said, without looking at him. He smiled faintly. Thanks. It wasn't just about the bread, he could feel it. She was deciding in her own way to stay. Later that day, a few miners passed Jace in the street. They didn't say anything, but he could feel the weight of their stares. Word would keep spreading, he knew, and sooner or later it would reach people who were far more dangerous than a few loudmouth miners. But when he returned home and saw Siren in the yard, hanging her cloak to dry in the sun, he also knew something else. Whatever came next, he wasn't letting her face it alone. It began with the low, distant hum of engines. Jace was in the yard, splitting kindling, when the sound reached him. It wasn't the sputtering rattle of a mining hauler or the sharp whine of a courier ship. It was deeper, heavier, carrying the kind of weight that meant trouble. He set the axe down and scanned the sky. Over the far ridge, a black silhouette emerged, its hull painted in jagged stripes of crimson and gold. Even at a distance, Jace recognized the markings. He'd seen them before, slavercraft. The ship angled toward the colony, its engines shaking the dry air. Jace's jaw tightened. Inside the house, Siren stood frozen at the window, her eyes fixed on the descending vessel. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. They've found me, she whispered. Jace stepped in beside her. How can you be sure? She didn't look away from the ship. That's the one. They'll come for me. They don't let anyone go. Then we won't be here when they try, he said. Her gaze snapped to him. You don't understand. If they know you helped me, they'll take you too. Or worse. I do understand, Jace replied, his voice steady. That's why we're leaving. They worked quickly. Jace pulled an old duffel from under his bed, stuffing it with food, water, and spare clothes. Siren hesitated at the doorway, the repaired pendant clutched in her fist. You have a ship? She asked. Small freighter, Jace said. Not much to look at, but it flies. They slipped out the back, keeping to the narrow alleys behind the houses. The slaver ship had docked at the far end of the colony, its boarding ramp already down. Jace could see figures in dark armor stepping out, moving in a wide line toward the market. They'll start asking questions, Siren said quietly. People will tell them where I am. Then we'll be gone before they get their answers. The docking bay was nearly empty when they reached it. Jace's freighter sat in Bay 6, a squat, weathered vessel with mismatched plating. He unlocked the hatch and ushered Siren inside. The interior smelled faintly of oil and old metal, but it was clean. Siren moved to the co-pilot's seat, her hands gripping the armrests. "Strap in," Jace said, moving to the controls. "We're going to lift fast." The engines roared to life, vibrations running through the deck. Jace's hands moved over the switches, flipping them with practiced precision. From the corner of the viewport, Sirin saw movement, 3 armed slavers entering the bay, sprinting toward the freighter. "They're here," she said. Jace hit the throttle. The ship lurched upward, the landing gear retracting as they cleared the bay. The slavers fired, but the bolts glanced off the hull plating. The freighter climbed hard, breaking through the thin clouds into open sky. Below, the colony shrank to a scattering of dust-colored roofs. But the danger wasn't behind them yet. The slaver ship lifted from its dock, engines flaring as it swung onto their tail. "They're faster," Sirin said, her voice tight. "Not in this terrain," Jace replied. He banked hard to the east, steering toward the jagged spires of the stone canyons that stretched beyond the colony. The freighter skimmed low over the desert floor, weaving between the narrow rock formations. The slaver ship followed, its larger frame struggling to match their turns. Jace gritted his teeth. "Hold on." He cut hard into a side canyon, the walls closing in on both sides. The slavers hesitated, then pulled back, unwilling to risk scraping their hull against the rock. They climbed sharply, bursting out into open air. The radar screen blinked, clear. Sirin let out a long, shaky breath. "We're not going back, are we?" she asked. "No," Jace said. "We find somewhere they won't follow." Her eyes softened. "You didn't have to do this for me." He glanced at her. "Yeah, I did." They flew for hours, leaving the colony and the slaver patrol routes far behind. Sirin stayed in the co-pilot's seat, her pendant resting in her lap, her gaze on the stars outside the viewport. Jace didn't press her to talk. He could see the thoughts turning behind her eyes, the fear, the relief, and something else. Finally, she spoke. "I thought when they found me it would be the end. I never imagined someone would run with me instead." "You're not running alone anymore," he said. And in that moment, she believed him. For 2 days, the freighter drifted between forgotten trade routes and empty stretches of deep space. Jace plotted their course to avoid patrol lanes, but the ship's navigation system was old, and the fuel gauge was dipping lower with each jump. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sirin's voice came from the co-pilot's seat. "We're being followed." Jace leaned over her console. The radar showed a faint signal, steady, closing. He tapped the screen. "Could be a traitor." Sirin shook her head. "They're holding distance. That's a hunter's move." He frowned. "How would you?" "I've seen it before," she said quietly. "Too many times." Within an hour, the signal grew stronger. When Jace switched the forward cameras to maximum zoom, the shape was unmistakable. A black hull marked with the same crimson and gold streaks. The slaver ship. "They must have picked up our trail at a refueling post," Jace muttered. "They won't stop now," Sirin said. Her fingers tightened around the pendant at her neck. "Once they have a scent, they keep it until you're caught or dead." "Well," Jace said, flipping a series of switches, "then let's make them work for it." The freighter's engines roared to full power, the vibration humming through the deck plates. Stars streaked past the viewport as they pushed into a higher sublight speed. The slaver ship answered by closing the gap. "They're faster," Jace said, "but they can't turn as sharp." He banked hard to port, cutting across the edge of a drifting asteroid field. Massive rocks tumbled slowly through space, their surfaces scarred by centuries of impacts. The freighter wove between them, thrusters firing in short, sharp bursts. The slaver ship followed, but their larger frame forced them to slow. Sirin's eyes scanned the NAV charts. "There's a mining route ahead, old, abandoned. Narrow tunnels. They can't follow us in there." "You know it?" Jace asked. "I worked there," she said, "before they took me." Her voice was steady, but Jace could see the tension in her jaw. They reached the mouth of the old mining field, a jagged gap in a massive asteroid, its interior lit by the faint glow of mineral deposits. Jace guided the freighter in, the hull scraping against rock as they squeezed through. Inside, the tunnels twisted and turned, opening into chambers the size of city streets before narrowing again to tight corridors barely wider than the ship. Sirin sat forward in her seat, calling out turns from memory. Left, then up, 40 degrees. Jace followed her instructions, trusting her instincts. Behind them, the slaver ship hovered at the entrance, unwilling to risk the tight space. But they didn't leave. They're waiting for us to come out, Jace said. Then we don't go out, Sirin replied. Not yet. They found a hollow chamber deep within the asteroid, large enough to hide the freighter completely in shadow. Jace powered down everything but life support, letting the ship's heat signature fade. For hours, they waited in silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air filters and the occasional groan of the asteroid's shifting rock. Sirin sat across from him, her knees pulled up, her gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the viewport. Finally, the radar showed the slaver ship moving away. Slowly, reluctantly. They're gone, Jace said. For now, Sirin murmured. When they powered up again and eased out of the tunnels, Sirin stayed in the co-pilot's seat. Her voice was quiet but sure. There's a place we can go. Somewhere they won't follow. Where? Jace asked. A refuge. My people call it the Veil. Hidden among the gas clouds of a dead star. It's where the survivors go. Jace studied her face. You've been there. No, she said. But I know the way. He leaned back in his seat. Then that's where we're headed. Sirin looked out at the stars, the faintest hint of a smile touching her lips. If we make it, I want you to meet them, to see what they've built. Jace nodded. We'll make it. And this time she believed him. The journey to the Veil took 3 days. They stayed off main routes, keeping the freighter's signature low and its comms silent. Sirin barely left the co-pilot's chair, her eyes fixed on the swirling star maps as she guided them through asteroid belts and narrow gravity channels. On the morning of the 4th day, they dropped out of jump space into darkness. Before them stretched a massive cloud of gas and dust, lit from within by faint, ghostly blues and silvers. The light shifted like smoke in water, hiding everything beyond. This is it, Sirin said quietly. The Veil. Jace stared at the display. Looks like you could get lost in there forever. That's the point. They eased into the cloud, the ship's exterior lights cutting a narrow path through the drifting mist. The sensors showed nothing but shifting density readings, as if the whole place was alive and breathing. Sirin gave him precise headings: 50 degrees starboard, 300 meters forward, hold, then down into a gap no wider than the freighter's wingspan. At first, Jace thought they were still alone. Then faint shapes emerged in the mist, structures built into the sides of enormous hollow asteroids, lights twinkling like stars in miniature. Ships of all sizes drifted in controlled patterns, their hulls painted in muted colors to blend with the cloud. You weren't lying, Jace murmured. It's hidden. Sirin's hand tightened on the armrest. Now we see if they'll let us in. A voice crackled through the comms, speaking in a language Jace didn't recognize. Sirin replied fluently, her tone steady. There was a long pause before the voice answered again, this time softer. They're sending a guide, she said. Follow their signal exactly. A small, sleek craft appeared out of the mist, its lights blinking in a slow pattern. Jace fell in behind it, matching its speed. They wound through more tight passages before emerging into a vast hollow chamber lit by hundreds of floating lanterns. Docking bays lined the walls, and walkways connected them like threads in a spider's web. The guide ship led them to an open berth. As soon as the freighter's ramp lowered, figures approached, tall, graceful, with the same subtle skin patterns as Sirin. One of them, an older woman with silver streaks in her dark hair, stepped forward. She and Sirin locked eyes for a long moment before the woman spoke a single word. Sirin's voice shook when she answered. Then the woman closed the distance and pulled her into an embrace. Jace stepped back, giving them space. He watched as others gathered, some smiling, others wiping at their eyes. When Sirin finally turned toward him, there was a brightness in her expression he'd never seen before. Later, they sat together in a quiet corner of the docking level. Siren wore clean clothes in the style of her people, her pendant resting against the new fabric like it had always belonged there. "I didn't think I'd see this place," she said. "I didn't think I'd see anyone who looked like me again." Jace smiled faintly. "I'm glad you were wrong." She studied him for a moment. "They've offered me a place here. A home. You should take it," he said. "You've earned it." Her gaze softened. "I will. But only if you stay too." Jace blinked. "Me? You saved me," she said simply. "Not just from them, but from being nothing. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you." He hesitated only a moment before nodding. "All right, we'll stay." The days that followed were slow and peaceful. Jace helped repair ships in the docks, while Sirin worked with the settlement's growers, learning to tend the vast hanging gardens that fed the community. At night, they'd sit by the observation windows, watching the mist shift and glow around the veil. Sometimes they talked. Other times they just sat in silence, the unspoken understanding between them stronger than words. One evening, Sirin placed a small pouch in his hands. Inside were 5 dull coins, the same amount he'd paid at the auction. "What's this?" Jace asked. "A reminder," she said with a faint smile, "of how little they thought I was worth, and how much you proved them wrong." He closed the pouch and handed it back. "Keep it. It's your story." She looked at him for a long moment before leaning her head against his shoulder. "Our story," she corrected, and in the quiet glow of the veil, Jace realized she was right.